My name is Marcus Hale. I am 42 years old. I live outside Missoula, Montana, in a rented house at the end of a dirt road, and I have not spoken publicly about what happened at the facility on Forest Road, 5,766 inches, the Bitterroot National Forest, for 4 years. I signed a federal non-disclosure agreement that prohibits me from doing exactly what I am doing right now. I have read the penalty clause 17 times in the last 6 months. The penalty is $1.2 million and federal criminal charges under a section of the National Security Act that my Army JAG attorney, when I described it to him over the phone last spring, told me he had never encountered in any accessible version of that statute. I asked him what that meant. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It means they wrote the clause for a specific purpose. I am aware of what I am risking. I am telling this story because Connie Voss is dead. Connie died in Butte, Montana, in October of 2023 of a hemorrhagic stroke at 56 years old, with no documented history of cardiovascular disease. She called me in the last week of her life from a number I did not recognize, a 406 area code, not in my contacts. She called twice. I did not answer the first call. I answered the second call on the third ring. What she said, in 4 seconds, was, 'They're moving them.' Then the call ended. I called back immediately. No answer. I called 3 more times that day. I called twice the following day. No answer. I do not know what she knew at the end. I do not know what she had seen in the 3 years since she left the compound. What I know is that she said 4 words to me in the last week of her life because she believed those 4 words would land in context, that I would understand them without more, that there was a body of shared knowledge between us that she could address with 4 words and I would fill in the rest. She was right. I filled in the rest. So I am going to tell you what happened from the beginning, and I am going to be as specific as I am capable of being. I was a military police sergeant for 11 years. I have a professional and deeply held bias against exaggeration. I have spent 4 years finding the most conservative interpretation of everything I observed, and the most conservative interpretation is still the account I am about to give you. I am asking you to stay with me. The job started with a Craigslist post. I want to establish who I was before that, because who a person is determines what they notice and what they discount. And the things I discounted early in this story are significant. I grew up in Great Falls, Montana. My father welded for an equipment company in Billings and was on the road for most of my childhood. My mother managed a dental office for 29 years and is still alive in Great Falls and does not know the full details of what I am going to describe. I enlisted in the United States Army at 19, completed military police corps training at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri, and spent the next 11 years doing MP work at Fort Campbell, 2 tours in Iraq in 2004 and 2007, 1 tour in Afghanistan in 2010, and a training and advisory role at Fort Bragg until my discharge in 2013. I was a sergeant. My conduct record was clean. My performance evaluations consistently rated me above standard in threat assessment, use of force judgment, and situational awareness. I say this not to establish credibility by declaration, but because for 11 years my primary professional function was to look at a situation and assess accurately whether something was wrong with it. The thing I'm about to describe is a situation I did not assess accurately, not early enough. After the Army, I did private contracting, security detail for infrastructure projects in Iraq in 2014 through 2016, with a firm out of Virginia called Cardinal Group Solutions, Kuwait in 2017, Afghanistan again in 2018 with a smaller outfit based in Colorado Springs, providing compound security for a logistics hub outside Kandahar. That contract ended in 2019 when Cardinal Group Solutions, who had reacquired the logistics contract, lost their operating license in Kandahar over a documentation dispute with the Afghan Ministry of Interior. 11 guards, including me, received a termination email at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. The email included a booking code for a return flight that turned out to have been voided without notification before I attempted to use it at Kandahar airfield. I got home on my own. I arrived in Missoula on the 2nd of October 2019 with $4,400 in a Glacier Bank checking account, a used 2009 F250 with a high-pitched whine in the transmission above 65 miles per hour, and a professional record that was intact but attached to a contract termination that required explanation every time I used it as a reference. I spent 2 weeks looking for work. I contacted 5 security firms in Montana and 3 in Idaho. I sent my resume to 2 national contractors who had posted positions for international work. I received 4 automated acknowledgements and 0 offers. On the evening of October 14th, I was in my room at the Days Inn off Interstate 90, eating a ham and cheese sandwich from the gas station across the street, going through Craigslist. Not because I expected Craigslist to have legitimate security work. I was going through Craigslist the way you do when you have been looking for 2 weeks and you are no longer certain what category of work you are looking for. The post was under General Labor. Facility Security. Remote location, Montana. 18 months, $200,000. Applicants must have security or law enforcement background. Clean federal record required. No family obligations for duration of contract. Reply with resume and reference contact only. No company name, no phone number. Contact only through a Craigslist relay address. I read it 3 times. I sent my resume before I finished the sandwich. The reply arrived at 11:47 p.m. It contained a GPS coordinate set in the Bitterroot National Forest, a physical address on Forest Road 5766, and 1 sentence: arrive at 0600. Tell no one. I set an alarm for 0430 and I went to sleep. I want to tell you, I had reservations. The accurate version is that I was nearly out of money and the job paid $200,000, and these 2 facts occupied significantly more space in my decision-making than any reservation I might have considered. I drove out before dawn. The Bitterroot Valley in mid-October still has color in the cottonwoods along the river, amber and yellow, and I drove through it in the dark, watching the sky go from black to navy to the specific gray that precedes mountain sunrise. Forest Road, 5,766 turns off. Montana Highway, 473, about 3 miles north of where Painted Rocks Road comes in from the south. It is a maintained gravel road running into the Bitterroot National Forest through lodgepole pine, up a drainage toward the Sapphires. I passed 2 hunting trucks parked at a pull-off, maybe a mile in, both dark, both occupied, 2 hunters eating early breakfast who watched me pass without particular expression. 7 miles in, the Forest Service pipe gate that should have been there had been replaced. What was there instead was a 10-foot steel panel on hydraulic hinges with a keypad reader and a camera mounted on a 15-foot post to the right side, the camera's active light visible in the dim. The posts supporting the panel were set in poured concrete. This was not a weekend installation. This was engineered, with equipment, with planning, over a period of time. The fencing running from the gate into the tree line on both sides was 8-foot chain link with 3 strands of barbed wire at the top, the same configuration used to secure industrial facilities and federal installations. A man was standing at the gate. His name was Garrett Oakes. He was in his early 50s, compact, wearing a dark green Carhartt and a tan synthetic base layer, short greyed beard, the eyes of someone who has not been sleeping well for long enough that it no longer shows unless you know what to look for. He had a laminated badge on a lanyard that read Consolidated Biological Systems LLC in clear block type and a title below it that I could not read at the angle he held it. He stepped forward when I opened my truck door and offered his hand. Firm grip, short shake, the handshake of a man who does not waste motion. He said, "Good morning. Your resume and references checked out. Let's go in and I'll walk you through the operation." The compound was visible once the hydraulic panel opened. The road continued 300 yards through the tree line to a cleared area of maybe 2 acres. The outer fence was one 6-foot chain link, topped with coiled concertina wire, 4 halogen flood towers at the corners, a gate on the near side with a keycard reader mounted at eye level. Inside the outer fence, the bunkhouse, a generator building, a 2-vehicle equipment bay, and a central operations block. The bunkhouse was a prefabricated modular structure painted green metal with a wood-floored entry porch. The operations block was similarly prefabricated, 1 story, containing a radio room, a first aid station, a storage room, and a kitchen, and behind all of it, the inner fence. The inner fence was the same configuration as the outer, 1 6-foot chain link topped with concertina wire, running its own enclosed rectangle set, 80 feet inset from the outer perimeter. Inside the inner fence was a concrete structure. 1 story, the roof peaked at maybe 30 feet, dimensions that I would later confirm as approximately 120 feet long by 60 feet wide, no windows. On the near side, a single man door in bare concrete. On the far side, facing away from the bunkhouse, a loading dock and a roll-up door wide enough for a pallet lift. The ventilation was a row of low-profile roof louvers running the ridge length of the building, flush with the roofline, screened with 1/4-inch mesh. No signage on any face of the building. No identification, no placard, no hazmat classification. On the inner gate, a secondary keycard reader. A different model than the outer gate reader. I did not recognize the manufacturer. I asked Oakes what was inside the building. He said, "Protected species under federal rehabilitation," without breaking stride toward the bunkhouse. 3 other guards were already on rotation. I met them in the kitchen that first morning. Dale Pruitt was at the table with a mug of coffee and a worn Louis L'Amour paperback with a broken spine. He was 44 years old, from a small town outside Cookeville, Tennessee, a former Army Ranger who had gotten out at 12 years and done a stint in private security in Afghanistan before this contract. He had a long scar on the left side of his jaw from something he described only as an incident in Paktika province. He was reliable and quiet, in a way that was different from reserve. Dale was quiet because he was careful with information, and he extended that care to information about himself as consistently as he extended it to operational matters. Connie Voss was standing at the counter, filling a thermos. She was 52, a retired Montana Highway Patrol officer from Butte, 22 years on the highway before she took a partial pension and picked up this contract through a law enforcement union referral. She kept a spiral notebook and logged every patrol round with a timestamp and weather condition. She had a definite hierarchy of coffees and strong opinions about which position in the brewing cycle required the most attention. The third guard was standing at the window when I came in and was visible through the glass after the introduction, walking the outer perimeter with his hands in his jacket pockets and his collar up. His name was Len. 1 name. He offered nothing further about himself at that introduction or at any point in the 6 months I worked alongside him. No hometown, no prior employer, no personal anecdote of any kind. He was present and he was professional. He did the job. He was the most completely contained person I have ever worked with in a security capacity. Oakes walked me through the operation at the kitchen table. The facility operated under a joint use agreement between Consolidated Biological Systems LLC, a Delaware incorporated holding company, and the U.S. Forest Service. Security contract provided 2 4-hour outer perimeter coverage and compound common area monitoring. Guards were not authorized to enter the warehouse building. Guards were not authorized to approach the inner fence without an escort designated by Oakes. Guards were not to discuss the contents of incoming deliveries. Guards used the compound GMRS radio frequency exclusively and did not use personal phones for any communication originating within the outer perimeter. The shift schedule was 3 on, 1 off, rotating, with a 2-hour patrol cycle and hourly radio check-ins. The last item in the briefing folder was the NDA. The Consolidated Biological Systems Non-Disclosure Agreement was 5 pages, standard corporate format, with a 10-year term and a $500,000 penalty provision. I read it fully. The language was standard throughout, except for one phrase in the scope clause, under covered information: the nature, behavior, and number of biological assets housed at the facility. Biological assets is not a phrase used in wildlife rehabilitation documentation. It is a phrase used in federal research installations and in certain categories of national security programming. I made a note of it. I put the pen down. I made a note of it, and I signed the document anyway, because I needed the work and because the money was $200,000 and I did not want to be in the Days Inn for another month. Oakes shook my hand, handed me my keycard for the outer gate and the operations block, and told me my first shift started at 1,400. The first 2 weeks were routine. This is not foreshadowing. Routine means what it says. I did the job description asked for. Patrol routes, hourly radio check-ins, perimeter walks in the cold October air, paperwork in the operations block on the overnight. The Bitterroot National Forest in mid-October is quiet, except for the wind and the occasional elk moving through the trees at the edge of the compound clearing. The floodlights on the 4 corner towers cast a yellow-white light that stops at the fence line. Beyond the fence, the lodgepole pines are dark and close together, and they move in the wind from the sapphires. I learned the other guards over those 2 weeks. Dale was dependable in the way of someone who has been doing this long enough not to need approval for it. He kept his kit clean and his patrol timing consistent. He had a quality of situational attention that I recognized from good operators in the field. He was always tracking the baseline and noting any deviation from it, even when the deviation was minor, even when he said nothing about it to anyone. I noticed Connie logging her spiral notebook, and I started paying attention to what she logged. She logged everything. Temperature at the start and end of each shift, wind direction, moon phase, the presence or absence of sounds outside the fence line. She noted the elk twice in the first week and a porcupine on the access road on the 9th day. She was building a baseline that was more detailed than any baseline the contract required, and I noted that and considered what it meant about her read on this assignment. Len walked his patrol route at precise intervals. When I started timing his rounds against mine, I found they matched to within 90 seconds every cycle. 90 seconds, over and over, for as long as I tracked it. There was either something wrong with him or something very, very right. I did not attempt to gain access to the inner fence area. I did not ask Oakes about the keycard system for the inner gate. I made my notes, and I watched, and I waited for the thing that would explain itself in due course. The first delivery arrived on a Tuesday at 0400. I heard the truck before I saw its lights through the lodge poles. A large diesel, a refrigeration unit running on the trailer, the specific sound of a reefer truck on a remote road at 4 in the morning. I was on the outer northeast sector, which gave me a partial sightline over the inner fence to the far side of the warehouse, where the loading dock faced away from the bunkhouse. The truck's headlights came through the outer gate, which Oakes had arrived at 0345 to operate, and the truck pulled around the curve of the inner fence perimeter to the loading dock side. Billings Livestock Solutions logo on the trailer. White cab, white 5.3, foot refrigerated trailer, the reefer unit on the rear, running steadily. The truck parked at the loading dock, and 2 men in white Tyvek coveralls and rubber boots got out of the cab. They went to the rear trailer doors. The loading dock, roll-up door, went up from the inside. From the interior of the warehouse, on ceiling tracks, a motorized scissor lift arm extended through the opening. What came off the trailer were beef carcasses. Not sectioned beef, not boxed cuts, not processed product. Whole beef carcasses, gutted, hide on, heads off, hung on meat hooks in the configuration they leave a slaughterhouse in before processing. The Tyvek men guided the hooks onto the ceiling track system, and the scissor lift transferred them inside one at a time. I counted them from my position. 11 carcasses went into the warehouse. Later that morning, in the kitchen, I asked Connie what the delivery manifest had listed. She said, "Therapeutic protein supplement, Class B biological, 4 units." She said it the way she said everything. Matter of fact, no particular inflection. 4 units. I had counted 11 carcasses. I poured my coffee and said nothing more. What I remember from that morning is not only the count discrepancy. What I remember is what happened after the loading door closed and the Tyvek men drove out. The compound went back to its standard quiet, the generator running, the lodgepoles doing what they always did in pre-dawn wind. I was completing my sector circuit at 0520, coming around to the closest approach to the inner fence on the east side of my patrol route, passing within 80 yards of the warehouse man door. The sound from inside the building started. I have tried many times to describe this accurately, and I keep landing on the same approximation. It was rhythmic and layered and low in frequency, low enough that I felt it in my sternum and in my back before I identified it as a sound coming from outside my body. It was not the generator. I had been on site for 12 days, and I had learned the generator's specific frequency signature at every load level. It was not the ventilation system. It was not mechanical at all. After 20 years of working in and around military installations and industrial facilities, I know the quality difference between something mechanical that runs and something biological that breathes. What I heard from inside that warehouse was biological. It was multiple sources producing the same rhythmic frequency with slight individual variations. The way a group of large animals breathing together in a confined space sounds slightly offset from each other, creating a chord rather than a unison. I kept walking. The second Tuesday delivery was the same. 11 carcasses on a manifest listing 4 units. Third Tuesday, 12. By the fourth, I had stopped counting carcasses and started noting other things. The smell, primarily. The smell from the warehouse during deliveries and for about 2 hours afterward was not the standard smell of a livestock processing environment. Copper was the dominant note, blood smell, expected from the cargo. But underneath the copper was something else, something warm and biological that layered differently from blood. Warm and musky in a way that suggested large animals, multiple animals, in an enclosed space. And underneath that, ozone. A secondary note of ozone which should not exist in the presence of living animals and which I had, until this, associated only with electrical systems, and with one specific afternoon on a riverbank in Anbar province in 2005, when I had been the first one to find something on a gravel bar outside Fallujah, something I had no category for then, and filed away. I filed the smell away the same way. I had become a good filer. In November, I started waking at 0230. Not from a sound, from the silence. I need to try to explain this accurately because waking from silence sounds like a contradiction, and it is not. Silence is not the absence of sound. True silence, directional silence, has a texture that ordinary quiet does not have. It has weight. It has orientation. You have learned to recognize it. If you have ever been in situations where recognizing it kept you alive, because it is what happens to a space when something large in that space is paying attention to something specific. The silence I started waking to in November in the Bitterroot National Forest bunkhouse had a direction. It moved from the bunkhouse toward the warehouse. It pulled, the way attention pulls, as if the air pressure in the compound had developed a gradient pointing at the inner fence. I got up on the first night and went to the bunkhouse window. The compound floodlights were on low load cycle, the dim yellow setting used on nights when the generator ran at reduced power. Low load light makes distances hard to judge. At 80 yards, I could resolve shapes, but not details. What I saw at the inner fence was a shape on the other side, standing. I want to be specific about the order in which I processed what I was looking at, because the order is relevant to what I was able to rationalize away and what I was not. First, the height. It was tall, significantly tall, in a way that disrupted the visual reference provided by the chain link fence behind it. A man standing at the inner fence appears below the top rail. This shape did not appear below the top rail. It cleared the top rail by a visible margin. Second, the posture. Bipedal. Not a bear standing up in a temporary posture to look at something, a resting posture. Weight distributed the way a thing distributes weight when standing is its natural state. Third, the arms. At 80 yards in low load floodlight, I should not have been able to clearly identify arm length. I identified it because the arms were long enough that they were visible against the chain link pattern in a way that arms held normally at a body's sides would not be visible. Whatever the hands were at the end of those arms, they were at the level of the knees. Fourth, the head angle. The shape's head was tilted, not looking up or down, tilted 20 degrees to one side. The specific angle of a thing that is curious about something it is trying to categorize. The specific angle of a thing whose attention is organized around a question. It was looking at the bunkhouse. I stood at the window for 4 minutes. I know it was 4 minutes because my watch was on the windowsill and I checked it twice. The shape did not move. I went back to my bunk. I lay on my back, with the ceiling 2 feet above my face, and I ran through the list of animals that could produce this visual profile at this location and at this time of year, and the list was short and terminated in the same place every time. I called it a bear. I told myself it was a large bear standing at the inner fence, attracted by the smell of the carcasses. I woke at 0230 again 3 nights later. I went to the window. There were 2 shapes at the inner fence, both still, both tall, both looking at the bunkhouse. I went back to my bunk, and I did not sleep again that night. I did not tell Dale. I did not tell Connie. I did not write it in my patrol log. I filed it in the place where I was storing everything about this job that I was not ready to confront, and I went on shift at 0600, and I walked my patrol routes in the cold, and I did the job. Pay attention to the fact that I was doing this. A man with 11 years of MP training and professional threat assessment experience, and I was filing it. I want you to understand the specific quality of not seeing that is available to a person when they need the job. And the alternative to not seeing is a conversation they are not equipped to have. I was a very good filer, and I was using every bit of that skill. Connie Voss sat down on the bunkhouse steps with me on a Wednesday evening in late November. She brought 2 moose drool beers from the case in the equipment bay. She held one out without a word. I took it. The temperature was about 20 degrees. Our breath made small clouds. The generator ran. The floodlights held the perimeter in their dim yellow. Beyond the outer fence, the lodgepoles were dark and still in a way that meant the wind had dropped and nothing was moving through them. We sat without talking for a while. I was watching a section of tree line to the northwest that had been quiet in a specific way for about 10 minutes, and I was telling myself it was the wind dropping. Connie said, "I took this job because a highway patrol union rep I trusted told me it was clean federal work. He said the program ran under a wildlife rehabilitation designation, legitimate, the kind of thing that generates paperwork because the species is sensitive, not because anything about it is unusual." I didn't say anything. She said, "He told me the most unusual thing I'd see up here was some big elk in recovery before reintroduction into the Selway Bitterroot." still quiet from me. She finished her beer, set the bottle on the step. She said, without looking at me, without any particular change in tone, in the same flat, matter-of-fact voice she used to note temperature and wind direction in her spiral notebook. Whatever's in there isn't elk. She went inside. She took her bottle with her. In the morning she logged her patrol rounds, made a full carafe, discussed battery replacement schedules with Dale, and behaved as if the conversation on the steps had not occurred. Her face was professional and contained. There was no crack in it. I watched all day for a sign that she intended to follow up on it. There was nothing. Whatever decision had been made in the night, the decision was to walk back inside the box of the contract and stay there. 6 weeks later, on a Monday morning in January, Oakes arrived with his rental SUV and a single sheet of paper. He told us that Connie Voss had completed her rotation. He said it with the same organized calm he used for everything. She was in the bunkhouse when he said it, coat already on, duffel bag already packed, and sitting on the floor next to her feet. She had known this was coming. She did not look at any of us. She picked up her duffel, walked out to the SUV, and got in. She left a full carafe of fresh coffee on the counter. I did not hear her voice again for nearly 3 years. In February, Dale Pruitt spent 3 days in the bunkhouse. He had a temperature of 102.8, which he measured himself and told me about because we were covering a 2-guard rotation and I needed to know his status. He described his other symptom once, on the first morning, an itch at the back of his head, a specific itch, he said, that moved, not a headache, not pressure, an itch that moved in the interior of the skull, between his ears and the base of his neck. He said it was like someone tuning a radio dial that had been installed where that space was. Oakes called it a protocol response. He used the phrase, the way you use a medical term for something you want to be the last word on the subject. He said Dale would be fine in 72 hours, and he was right. Dale recovered, went back on rotation, and never mentioned the protocol response to me again. He had 8 months left on his contract, and he was the kind of man who would complete it. This was the second time I had heard the phrase protocol response. The first time had been in reference to a guard named Fisher, who had been on rotation before my arrival and had been reassigned, according to Oakes, due to a protocol response at some point I could not pinpoint. I had filed the phrase when I first heard it. I took it back out now and looked at it more carefully. I was covering 2 extra sectors during Dale's 3 days. Len on the south perimeter, me covering north, east, inner perimeter approach, and west. I was tired from the extended rotation and the cold, a deep muscle tiredness that the bunkhouse heat only partially addressed. On the second night of Dale's 3 days, I was on the inner perimeter approach sector at 218 inches the morning. Then I was at the inner gate. I need to be precise about what I mean when I say that. I mean that the 40 yards between the northeast corner post and the inner gate simply did not exist in my awareness. I was walking the approach sector at the northeast corner post, boots in the packed snow, the floodlights doing their low dim across the inner compound, and the next thing I was aware of was standing at the inner gate with my keycard in my right hand. My right hand? Not on the lanyard I wore at my left hip, where I kept it on every shift, in my right hand gripped. The keycard I had checked at the start of my shift and confirmed was on its designated hook in the operations block. Because in-offense access required Oakes's written authorization, and no one on the current rotation had that authorization. The keycard was in my right hand. The keycard reader on the inner gate was lit green. I want you to hold that for a moment. A keycard that was locked on a hook in the operations block 200 yards away was in my hand, and a system that should not have authorized my access level was reading me as authorized. At 218 inches the morning, while a guard I trusted was in his bunk with 102.8 degrees and a radio dial itch in the back of his skull. I put the card against the reader. The latch clicked. The gate opened inward 6 inches on its spring and stopped there, waiting. I stood on the threshold for a moment. The inner compound was 80 feet of packed snow between the gate and the warehouse man door. The warehouse exterior was lit by the perimeter floodlights, the concrete face of it pale and flat and silent. No sound from inside. The ventilation louvers were closed for the cold. The loading dock on the far side was dark and still. I walked toward the door. The smell reached me at 40 yards. Copper and ozone, the layered warm musk base beneath both, thicker than I had encountered on delivery mornings, concentrated in a way that should not have been possible in open air at 15 degrees Fahrenheit. It did not dissipate. It moved from the building toward me, the way a signal moves, with direction and intent, specific and purposeful. The man door was open, not forced open, not broken. Open the way a door opens when the latch has been released from inside by something that knows what a latch is, and then pushed with enough force to swing outward 2 feet and stay there. I stopped at the threshold. Everything I had been trained to do in a security breach situation told me to radio in, to establish contact, to wait for backup. I did not radio in. I went through the door. The red emergency lighting activated when the door swung wide. A photosensor circuit, low lumen, the flat red wash that eliminates shadows and makes all distances look the same distance. It lit 120 feet of bare concrete floor, the ceiling track grid 30 feet above, the 11 hanging carcasses from Tuesday's delivery. 2 of the 11 were already stripped, not gnawed, not scattered. The bones were clean in the way that bones are clean when the tissue has been removed with control and precision rather than torn away. I processed this in approximately 1 second. Then my eyes found them. There are 6. My brain in that first instant tried to sort what I was looking at into categories it already had. 6 large animals, large, bipedal. That is where the existing categories began to fail, because bipedal is a category that has 2 entries in the human brain, and neither entry fit what I was looking at. The one nearest to me was to my left, maybe 30 feet from the door, at the closest set of hanging carcasses. Both of its hands were gripping the spine of a carcass, the head bowed, the sound it was making wet and rhythmic and low, a consuming sound with a resonant quality that carried through the concrete floor. The 2 against the far wall were crouched, 120 feet away, forearms resting on their knees, weight forward, a posture of rest that could shift into motion in a single instant. The 4th was moving laterally across the space, from the right wall toward the left, and my eyes had a genuine moment of difficulty tracking it. Not because it was fast, because the way it covered ground was wrong. It moved in a straight line with no vertical oscillation, no side-to-side shift, the motion of something whose skeleton is arranged for a kind of locomotion that human anatomy does not include. The 5th was against the right wall to my immediate right, a shoulder pressed flat to the concrete, facing away from me, both arms at its sides. The 6th was in the center of the floor, 50 feet away, facing away from me. It turned. I am going to be in the present tense for this. The past tense creates a distance that is not accurate to what happened. It turns. Not a step and pivot. A rotation that begins at the hip and travels up the spine in a wave. A motion that is smooth in a way that human rotation is not smooth because it travels through joints that have a range of motion the human skeleton does not have. It turns and it faces me, and it is between 7 and 8 feet tall, and I am no longer estimating. The shoulders are broad in a way that the red emergency lighting translates into a shadow on the concrete floor that is wider than 2 men standing together. The torso inclines slightly forward, the center of gravity carried in the chest rather than the lower back, the posture of a thing that has always carried its weight this way and has built the musculature to support it. The legs are long, and the thighs are heavy, and the knees are low relative to the hip joint. The stance is wide. The feet, what I can see of them in the flat red light, are spread and set, the flat placement of something very heavy coming to a deliberate stop. The arms hang, the fingertips rest at the level of the knees. I am saying this again because I need you to have the correct geometry in your head. The fingertips, hanging at full rest, are at the level of the knees. The hands have 5 fingers. The fingers are long, and the knuckles are pronounced, and the skin of the hands is dark and lightly furred, and the joints are large. The hands are the thing I keep coming back to when I try to reconstruct this, because the hands are the first thing that broke the last category I was trying to use, which was some form of large primate. The hands have too many joints. Not extra fingers, extra joints. The fingers bend at a third point between the knuckle and the fingertip that the human finger does not bend at. I am looking at the face. The jaw extends forward, beyond the line of the brow, not to the full degree of a complete muzzle, but enough that the lower face projects in a way that no human face projects. The brow is continuous across both eye sockets, low and heavy, a single unbroken ridge of bone. The nose is broad and flat, the nostrils large and visibly active, cycling through specific targeted sampling in short rhythmic bursts, pulling the air in, processing it, making decisions. The ears are large and forward set, and they are moving, orienting the way ears orient when they are receiving from multiple directions simultaneously. The eyes are set forward in the skull, the predator arrangement, not to the sides. In the red light, the eyes return the light amber. With vertical pupils, it takes one step toward me. Not a lunge, not an aggressive advance. One deliberate step, the foot placed flat and broad. The weight transferring forward over the placement in a controlled shift that I feel as a vibration through the soles of my boots and up through the concrete floor into my legs. It stops. It tilts its head, 20 degrees to the right. The specific angle I had been watching from the bunkhouse window for months, at 60 and 80 yards in dim light, now 50 feet away in red emergency lighting with no fence between us. A sound comes out of it, not from the throat alone, from the chest, from a resonating structure that the human thorax does not contain. 2 notes, falling, a descending interval. The quality of the sound is not aggressive. The quality of the sound is communicative. 2 notes with specific, intentional interval, and then silence. The one at the carcasses to my left goes still. Its head comes up. The 2 against the far wall turn. The one moving laterally stops mid-stride. One leg suspended in the air and holds the position without any visible effort. The way a thing holds a position when stopping is no more difficult than moving. The 5th one, against the right wall, rotates away from the concrete and faces me. They are all looking at me now. My hands are at my sides, not at the weapon on my right hip, not at the radio on my left. Open at my sides, the way you hold your hands when something in your assessment has concluded, faster than conscious thought, that the weapon is not the correct variable in this situation, that the relevant variable is something else, and you do not yet know what it is. The one in the center takes a second step. Same controlled weight transfer, same deliberate placement. It is now perhaps 40 feet from where I stand at the doorway. It extends its right arm toward me. The extension is slow. The arm reaches the point of full human extension, where the elbow locks out and the shoulder at maximum reach, and then it continues past that point. Past the anatomical limit without strain, smoothly, because the shoulder joint in this body has a range of motion that the human shoulder joint does not have. The arm extends fully, the palm faces upward. Open. In the hand is a collar. Black nylon, industrial grade, the weight of a collar made for a large working dog or a livestock guardian. Brass buckle, silver D-ring. The buckle is open. The 2 layers of nylon are threaded through each other in the clean configuration of a deliberate unbuckling. This collar was not torn off whatever was wearing it. It was removed. The buckle was operated. There is no tag, no identifying mark on the hardware. It holds the collar toward me, open palm, at the end of that extended arm, at 40 feet, and it looks at me. The way it looks at me. I have been trying to describe this accurately for 4 years, and the closest I can get is this. It looks at me the way you look at someone when you have something to tell them and you are not certain whether they have the capacity to receive it, and you are waiting to find out. Patience, not passivity, not stillness. Active, engaged, directed patience. Waiting. The warmth comes up in the backs of my hands. I do not describe this for effect. The warmth in the backs of my hands was sudden and specific, and it was the same warmth I would wake to for the next 4 years at 0230, but I did not know that then. Then it was simply a warmth that rose in the skin of the backs of both hands, starting from the knuckles outward. At the moment, I made sustained eye contact with the thing standing in the center of the warehouse floor, holding an open collar toward me in an open hand. I take 1 step backward. It holds the arm steady. It does not step forward. The amber eyes stay on my face. I take another step backward. The door frame finds my right shoulder. From the rack to my left, the one that had been feeding makes a sound, a single falling note, different from the central one's 2-note call, shorter and lower. The central one's ears orient toward the rack and then back to me, a single smooth pivot of attention. I step through the door. I walk backward across the inner compound. The snow compresses under my boots with a sound that is the only sound in the compound, a dry, compressing sound that is very loud in the directional silence pressing around my retreat. 30 feet. 50. I find the inner gate with my right hand, my fingers locating the frame without my eyes leaving the warehouse man door. I get through the gate. I push it closed behind me. I hear the latch engage. I stand at the outer side of the inner gate for a moment. My breath is fogging in the 15-degree air in short, tight bursts, not the long, slow clouds of a person breathing at rest. My hands are on the gate frame. The warmth in the backs of them is still there. I walk to my truck. I get in. I close the door. I put both hands on the steering wheel and I stare through the windshield at the inner fence and the dark warehouse beyond it. The compound is exactly as I left it. Flood towers on low dim, generator building running at its standard frequency, lens sector light green on the south corner indicator panel in the cab. Everything is as it should be. Nothing has changed. I sit in my truck until 0545. I do not radio in the breach. I do not write it in my patrol log. I complete my shift at 0600 and I go into the bunkhouse and I sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and I sit there until my hands stop shaking, which takes a while. Garrett Oakes arrived at 0730. He should have been at his scheduled weekly check-in at 0900. He drove a plain white Ford F-150 with Montana plates that I had not seen before. He came through the outer gate, parked at the bunkhouse, opened the bunkhouse door, and sat down across from me at the kitchen table. He looked at me. He said, "You went through the gate. Flat, contained. A statement of observed fact." He reached inside his Carhartt jacket and placed a document on the table in front of me. It was not the Consolidated Biological Systems NDA. The letterhead at the top of the first page carried the seal of a federal agency. The agency name in the line directly below the seal had been crossed out, not with a redaction stamp, not with a printed black bar. With a physical black permanent marker, one firm stroke, applied to the original document by a human hand pressing hard enough that the ink bled through to the back of the page. The rest of the document was printed cleanly. Only the agency name had been addressed by hand. I looked at Oakes. He looked at the document. The terms, non-disclosure, extending 25 years from the date of signing, a single exception permitting disclosure only after my own death, in writing, to a designated executor. Penalty, $1.2 million civil penalty and criminal charges. under Section 798A of the National Security Act. The scope clause listed, under covered knowledge, the nature, behavior, population, and identity of biological assets housed at Facility 7766B to include any direct or indirect interaction between contractor, security personnel, and said assets, as well as any observations, physical symptoms, or physiological changes experienced by contractor security personnel in connection with said interactions. Physiological changes. The clause had been written to include physiological changes experienced by security personnel. The clause anticipated this. Whatever I had felt in the backs of my hands at 320 inches that warehouse, the agency behind the crossed-out letterhead had already written a legal framework around it. Oakes put a fountain pen on the table beside the document. He said, "You have a sister in Bozeman. Her name is Renee. She teaches 3rd grade at Hawthorne Elementary School." He said, "I want to be clear that that is a context statement, not a threat." Renee's daughter was 6 years old and was in her mother's class. Hawthorne Elementary is a single-story building with a playground visible from the street. I looked at the pen. I looked at the document. Oakes reached into his jacket pocket and placed his phone on the table. Screen up, turned so I could read it. A bank transfer notification. The final $80,000 payment under my original contract, which had been scheduled for the 1/8-month mark. It was in my account. The transfer was timestamped 0643 that morning, 47 minutes before Oakes drove through the outer gate. He said my contract was complete, effective immediately. I picked up the pen. I signed the document. I put the pen down. Oakes took the document and the pen. He stood up. He extended his hand and I shook it. He said, "Good work. Have a safe drive." He walked out. The white F-150 went back down the compound road and through the outer gate and down Forest Road 5766, and I sat at the bunkhouse table with a cup of coffee that was going cold and a complete, total inability to think in a straight line. I packed my duffel in 20 minutes. I told Dale I was done. He nodded the way he nodded at things that were not his business to question. I drove out through the outer gate, which was standing open, and down Forest Road 5766 and past the hunting pull-off where the trucks had been parked in October and out onto Montana 473. I drove to Bozeman. I sat in Renee's kitchen and I told her everything. The compound, the carcasses, the shapes at the fence, the night I walked through the gate, what was inside the warehouse, the collar, the extended arm, the amber eyes, the agency name crossed out in permanent marker. She listened to all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Marcus, I think you should talk to someone." She meant a therapist. She is a 3rd grade teacher and she loves her brother, and she was not wrong. I drove back to Missoula. I rented an apartment. I had $200,000 in my account, the full contract amount, the first time I had had money like that in my life. I spent the following months being careful about the money and less careful about other things. The waking at 0230 continued after I left the compound, not every night, regularly. The directed silence was gone, replaced by a simple waking without stimulus, a sudden clarity in the dark that had no external cause I could identify. I would wake and I would lie still, and the backs of my hands would be warm, the same localized, pulsing warmth from the warehouse floor, lasting 20 minutes, sometimes 2 hours before fading. Stronger on some nights than others. On the nights when it was strongest, I would get up and stand at my apartment window and look north, toward the Bitterroot, the way you look in a direction when something in you has an orientation you cannot account for. I told myself it was nerve damage from cold exposure. 6 months of 15 to 20 degree temperatures, significant cold stress. I found documentation supporting anomalous sensory symptoms from cold-related nerve damage. I held on to that documentation with both hands. I held it for 4 years. In September of 2023, I received 2 calls from a 406 number I did not recognize. The first came on a Tuesday evening. I did not answer. The second came Thursday morning, and I answered on the third ring. It was Connie Voss. Her voice was the same. Flat, precise, the careful construction of someone who measures words because they have learned that words have consequences. She sounded like she was calling from a kitchen somewhere quiet. She said 4 words. "They're moving them." The call ended. I called back immediately. No answer. 3 more calls that day. Nothing. Twice the following day. Nothing. Connie Voss died on the 2nd of October, 2023, in Butte, Montana, hemorrhagic stroke. She was 56 years old. No documented history of cardiovascular disease. Her obituary in the Montana Standard listed her 22 years with the Montana Highway Patrol and her surviving family. It did not mention the Consolidated Biological Systems contract. The funeral was private. I called Dale Pruitt the week she died. He answered once, in August of last year. He said, "I can't talk about this." He hung up. He has not answered since. I drove out to Forest Road, 5,766 inches, November 2023. The gate was a new installation, heavier than what was there in 2019. Concrete pillar posts, a steel panel that was substantially more substantial than what I had driven through in October of 2019. A new keypad, a new camera. I sat on the highway shoulder and looked at it for a while. I did not get out of my truck. The Federal Land Management Database lists Facility 7766B as an active wildlife rehabilitation site under the Consolidated Biological Systems lease. I checked this 2 weeks ago. The listing is current. The contact is a P.O. box in Billings. I have the NDA on the table in front of me right now. I know the clause numbers. I know the penalty provision. I know what I am risking by sitting here and telling you this. I am doing it because Connie called me 4 days before she died to tell me something was moving, and because Dale won't answer, and because there are things that, once you have seen them, do not stay filed. The backs of my hands are warm right now. I am looking at them in the lamplight. The skin looks exactly as it should. No mark, no discoloration, nothing to photograph or show a doctor, just warmth. Specific, located, pulsing slightly, the way it has been for 4 years on the nights when it comes. Last night it was strong. I woke at 0232. I stood at the window. I looked north, toward the Bitterroot, toward the Sapphire Mountains and Forest Road 5766, and the new gate with the keypad code I do not have. I stood there until it faded. Whatever was in that warehouse, whatever held out an open palm in the red light of a Montana February, whatever looked at me the way you look at someone when you want them to understand something and you are not sure if they are capable of understanding it, it is somewhere. The gate on Forest Road, 5766, has a new code. The warmth in my hands does not leave all the way, not anymore.